Hello, Dr. Coker here, and I'm going to explain the entire post-Realm Reborn story in 10 minutes. This includes patches 2.1 through 2.55. Let's get started. At the conclusion of A Realm Reborn, the patch stories begin with you helping Minfilia reconnect with her mother, who she hasn't seen since before the Calamity. Then, Alphinaud convinces Minfilia and the Scions to move their headquarters to the Rising Stones in Revenant's Toll, a town in the middle of Eorzea which is independent and neutral. Preparations begin for the move. Meanwhile, in Thornmarch, near Gridania, some of the Moogles have summoned the Moogle King, and they are acting as though they're tempered. You slay the Moogle King and find out that the Ascians were behind this. Afterwards, you meet a new Ascian named Elidibus, who wears a white robe and calls himself an emissary. He says Lahabrea's ways were wrong, and he intends no harm, but he does insist that Zodiark is the one true god. After this, Urianger says the students of Baldesion, a group of scholars allied with the Scions, have mysteriously vanished. Sometime later, around 200 refugees arrive in Thanalan who've sailed all the way from Doma. They are led by an Ahra woman named Yugiri, who says that Garlemald razed Doma to the ground and the Domans fled here in desperation. Unfortunately, the Sultana is unable to help them in Ul'dah, as the syndicate that rules alongside her votes against it. But Alphinaud secures a home for them in Revenant's Toll, where the demand for labor is high, and the Scions' new headquarters at the Rising Stones is now in use. At the Scions' next meeting at the Rising Stones, Y'shtola reports that she's investigated a series of crystal robberies that originate from the Sahagin tribe in Lenosha. The Sahagin are known worshippers of Leviathan, so you and the Scions partner with Merlwyb from Limsa Lominsa to try and stop the summoning. You fail to stop it and end up having to slay him using a massive sea contraption devised by Storm Marshal Einzar. Meanwhile, Minfilia observes everything from a distance, but more on that later. Later at the Rising Stones, news arrives that riots are breaking out in Ul'dah, so you travel there to meet with Alphinaud and investigate. He's found that the rioters are professionally armed, and the whole thing seems deliberate, not spontaneous. You track down the merchant who sold them weapons, but he's assassinated right in front of you. The plot gets far deeper when you meet with the Sultana and Raban. It turns out that a syndicate member named Teleji Adeleji is agitating these riots on both sides in order to convince the public that the refugee situation is out of control. Then he wishes to get the Carteneau Reclamation Bill passed, which would convert the wasteland at Carteneau to an asylum for all the refugees. But his motives aren't so pure, as it turns out that the destruction wrought at Carteneau 5 years ago uncovered an ancient superweapon called Omega that has been buried for millennia. Omega was an Allagan weapon, and the Allagans lived 4 calamities ago, which is approximately 5,000 years in the past. Anyway, if Teleji gets the bill passed, he will control the Allagan ruins, and thus control Omega. Moving on for now, Papalimo reports that the primal Ramu stirs but remains non-aggressive. You journey to the Twelveswood to officially make peace with Ramu, and he agrees to it after trial combat, which Urianger observes from a distance. Back at the Rising Stones, Urianger and Minfilia report on their observations. They note that when mortals die, their ether returns to the ethereal sea to be used again one day when new lives are born. But immortals work differently. If they are slain, their soul lingers intact for a time, then occupies a new host. The Ascians are immortal and are continuously reborn when they are slain, but Urianger and Minfilia believe that in between hosts, their souls may be trapped, and this could provide a means to permanently kill them. More research is needed, so in the meantime you have some quality time with the Domans. Next, Alphinaud sets to work forming a new grand company called the Crystal Braves, which are tied to no nation but answer to the Scions, and you help him recruit many of its members. After this, a caravan of supplies from Camp Dragonhead arrives in Revenant's Toll, but they say they were attacked by heretics. At Camp Dragonhead, Lord Horchafant says the heretics are led by Lady Iceheart, who you attempt to track down but fail. Back at the Rising Stones, Alphinaud has his inauguration ceremony for the Crystal Braves. Then news arrives that Kryl, a student of Baldesion and close friend of Minfilia, is reportedly still alive. As time passes, an Alamegan named Ilberd rises to become second in command for the Crystal Braves. One day he reports that they have a spy in their ranks known as the Ivy, so you chase a lead to Ul'dah and speak with Raban. Raban and Ilberd are old buddies and they catch up for a bit, then Raban agrees to keep an eye out. Back at the Rising Stones, Minfilia says that we need to get Ishgard on board to join the Eorzean Alliance, and Sir Aymeric, Lord Commander of the Ishgardian Temple Knights, has requested to speak with you, so this meeting could be significant. You and Alphinaud meet with Aymeric and Horchafant at Camp Dragonhead. Aymeric politely declines to join the alliance, but instead promises to protect your caravans if in exchange you'll check on the Keeper of the Lake. He's referring to the site where Midgard Sormir clashed with the Garleans 15 years ago. At that time, Midgard Sormir and the massive Garlean airship known as the Agrius crashed to Earth together and haven't stirred since. You agree to these terms, but are interrupted when a messenger says Iceheart's heretics have attacked another caravan. This time, you successfully track her down and confront her at Snowcloak, where she tells you are misinformed. She says she does what she does for Hydaelyn, and her intent is to end the war between dragon and man. She somehow teleports away, then you are called to an urgent meeting in Gridania. At this meeting in Gridania, we learn that the Emperor of Garlemald has died, and we don't know the intentions of the new Emperor, Varus. It seems even more imperative now to get Ishgard to join the alliance. After the meeting, Ilberd says the Ivy is in Gridania at this moment, and with the help of Doman ninjas, you capture her. You return to the Rising Stones, and Minfilia introduces a visiting scholar, Moonbrida, who's an expert on aetheryte crystals and a childhood friend of Urianjay's. Returning to the site where Iceheart teleported away, Moonbrida is able to track her location to the Ak-Afa amphitheater, where you confront her again. This time, she transforms into the primal Shiva and you defeat her. Defeating Shiva reverts her back to Lady Iceheart, who again insists you don't understand the war you fight in, and again references Hydaelyn. Afterwards, Sir Aymeric and Lord Horshaphant are very thankful for the crippling blow you've dealt to the heretics, but still won't join the alliance. Back at the Rising Stones, everyone except Moonbrida is surprised to learn that Iceheart was able to transform into a primal. More news arrives from scholars disappearing, and it's observed that all of them were studying something called the Rejoining. Meanwhile, at a private dinner, the Sultana reveals to Khan Isina and Merlwyb that she intends to step down as Sultana and let Ul'dah be governed by the people. Later at the Rising Stones, a crystal brave named Riol suspects something is amiss within the company, but more on this later. Lucia from Ishgard, second in command to Sir Aymeric, arrives saying their astrologians are seeing strange signs at the Keeper of the Lake. You head there and fight your way to the top, and to your shock, Midgard Sormir opens his eyes and speaks, saying Ishgard shall burn. He then removes Hydaelyn's blessing from you, and decides to accompany you via a miniature form of himself. Back at the Rising Stones, Minfilia is obviously concerned that you no longer carry the Blessing of Light. This is especially concerning because it's Hydaelyn's blessing that makes you immune to tempering, and is the reason you've been able to slay primals this whole time. But Moonbrida enters and says that white Auracite can be used to temporarily store an Ascian's soul, which can then be destroyed by a burst of ether. You accompany her to northern Thanalan as she charges a portable device with ether from the land, but a new Ascian appears named Nabriales. He notices you no longer have the protection of Hydaelyn, so he goes straight to the Scion's headquarters. You rush back and arrive just after him, and he abducts Minfilia, but you follow him into a place called the Crystallis, where you defeat him and save Minfilia. Moonbrida tosses the white Auracite and his soul is trapped, but you're unable to generate enough ether to kill him, so Moonbrida sacrifices herself to see the Ascian destroyed. The Scions mourn the loss of Moonbrida, and Urianger returns to the Waking Sands to grieve alone. Some days later, outside with Ida, a terrifying roar fills the skies. Back at the Rising Stones, Lucia has returned and begs the Scions for help, as she says that was the dragon's call to war. Meanwhile, we see that Lady Iceheart assists them. You and Alphinaud meet with Sir Aymeric, who introduces Ishgard's finest warrior, Estinian. They acknowledge that they don't really deserve help from other Eorzean nations, but manage to convince you and Alphinaud when Aymeric points out that if the dragons raise Ishgard, it's only a matter of time until the Garleans claim their land and expand their borders. Alphinaud then reports back to the other Scions, who then meet with the Eorzean leaders in Ul'dah to try and convince them. They are reluctant because of Ishgard's refusal to join them in the past, and give a lukewarm response, agreeing to send a few small forces. The dragons of Dravania then assault the Gates of Ishgard, also known as the Gates of Judgment. You and the small armies succeed in pushing back the assault, but the ancient dragon Nidhogg, crazy son of Midgard Sormir, was expected to make an appearance and never did. Back at the Rising Stones, Tataru requests some time off. After failing to learn the ways of combat, she instead decides to vacation in Costa del Sol, and you help her hunt for clams. After this, a crystal brave named Wilrid is murdered, and Riol is back with more suspicions. He believes Teleji is behind this, and that there may be a faction of braves plotting something. The Scions are then invited to a banquet in Ul'dah. At this banquet, Sir Aymeric thanks everyone for their help with the defense of Ishgard, but then suddenly the Sultana is assassinated. Even worse, you are framed for it, and all the Scions are arrested. Teleji paid off some of the braves to betray you. You and the Scions all manage to escape, but in the process, Roban has his arm cut off by Ilberd, his old friend, and Roban is arrested for murdering Teleji. The Scions are scattered, and ultimately, you, Alphinaud, Yugiri, and Tataru take refuge at Camp Dragonhead under Lord Horshaphant, while the fates of everyone else remains unknown. Alphinaud is crushed and despondent, blaming himself and his arrogance for forming his own company. Aside, we see that Eorzea meets with the Ascians in secret. This concludes the post-A Realm Reborn story, where things are really starting to pick up. Stay tuned to this channel. I'll be working on a 10-minute recap of Heavensward next. Until next time.